So I guess we've had some amazing talks. Apologies, I've had to step in and out, but what I have caught is, really a clear transition that we're experiencing. And digitisation is going to play a significant role as we move towards a more decentralised and decarbonised energy sector. I guess my talk, so SwitchDin, we have focused around this integration challenge of DER. We provide virtual power plants and microgrid support platforms. What I'm going to focus on in this talk is really some of the key issues I see at the lower end of that pyramid of the platform, and some of the key issues that I see as being a barrier to scale, and as that relates to one particular technology buzzword, edge computing. So I'm going to start with a house, but of course we're also talking about other types of DER, and of course the growth of rooftop solar is itself driving a transition in the hearts and minds of most consumers. In South Australia at the moment, rooftop solar meets the minimum base load for 7 to 8 weeks of the year. By 2027, according to AEMO, that'll happen almost every day of the year, and by 2032 in Australia, that'll happen in every state, every day of the year. So managing these generation, even though they're micro on their own, is going to scale to be a significant challenge of national significance. Batteries, of course, are a fantastic opportunity to utilise that locally generated energy for the benefit of the consumer, but also for the benefit of the energy system. And I guess part of the driver here has been the emergence of new ownership models for these DER assets. Traditionally, ownership was very much on the utility participant side, and now we've got the beyond-the-meter prosumers bringing new types of ownership, and all that's driving new business models. And of course, in commercial sector, we're seeing concomitant growth, again driven by new objectives, new types of optimisation problems emerging, delivering value both to the owners of the system, but also potentially to the networks. And we're not just talking anymore about generation or storage. Loads are playing a significant role, and we're seeing that being reflected in transitions in our energy markets. And one can envisage in Australia in the not too distant future, hopefully, a properly flexible market where loads and generation are two sides of the same coin. All these technologies and new ownership models are driving also transformations in the topologies that we're experiencing in the grid. The deployment of microgrids is now being seen as a way for property developers to reduce their costs of development, or for communities at the edge of the grid to manage risk and ensure improved supply security. But really it's about constraining investment and defining new types of ownership and participation roles. Embedded networks as well are emerging as new playgrounds for energy value and generation, and this is a rich and diverse stream of business emerging. Loads are playing a significant role, and of course are being handled in that way. And so what we're seeing really is this huge blossoming of all these different types of DER devices. The residential side and commercial to some extent, but largely residential, we're essentially seeing this inrush of what are basically consumer appliances. Technologies derived from companies with very different pedigrees than the sorts of companies that provide technology for the grid. So they're not necessarily coming with the consistent standards and frameworks for operation, functional elements. Certainly how they integrate with the grid is being defined by grid connection standards and other opportunities. But what we're seeing right now is a real vacuum in terms of the sorts of frameworks that we really need to control lots of small and diverse generation and storage and load appliances at scale. Right now what we're seeing are small pilots and early experience, but really doing this is an extremely complicated activity. The notion that one vendor is going to roll out a consistent platform using their own proprietary protocols is not going to make it in the market that is the highly competitive market we're seeing today. So the three problems that I wanted to focus on are really about how do we handle those issues and what are the risks that are going to emerge. And complexity we see as being a major challenge. Now, it's not like the energy sector hasn't historically dealt with complexity. But the energy sector has come from a centralised management approach where the deployment of standards was all part of the technology development and evolution pathway. On the consumer-facing side, we have not only emerging technologies and customer offerings, their development of proprietary systems is indeed part of the features of this innovation ecosystem. Imposing standards without careful thought risks actually stifling the innovation opportunities that can come from these types of DER. Heterogeneous equipment, different vendors, protocols, evolving user habits, the role of the prosumer, people investing their own money to provide themselves with energy services. We're going to see the emergence of new companies that are offering these energy services, that are offering these technologies into houses, but charging customers not for the technologies but for the services they offer only. So new types of energy services altogether. And of course, new opportunities for market participation is only going to drive more innovation in this space. Security, I guess, we've identified it separately, but it certainly is related to complexity. And we're talking there not just about supply security, having lots more smaller variable generation in place, linked to customer behaviour, so different load consumption patterns. But we're also talking about the security issues that are going to arise from the new types of technologies, in particular the cloud platforms of equipment vendors, as they come into the marketplace. The notion of having large, significant amounts of DER under the control of 50 to 100 different vendor cloud platforms is possibly going to present very new challenges to aggregators and utilities that they traditionally haven't had to deal with. And in fact, no sector has ever had to deal with. And efficiency. New ownership models imply that these assets are going to be under the expectation is they're going to deliver new types of value to whoever owns them or to whoever's deriving value from them. So we need to be careful in deploying all these systems that we can deliver the sorts of optimisation that makes sense to drive efficiencies, not just at the local level, but throughout the whole system. Now, of course, other people much smarter than myself are thinking about this, and Electricity Networks has clearly identified ways forward around these different options. The focus on a customer-centric energy service, clearly starts to address some of these dilemmas. Power system security, the shifting incentives and approaches to managing networks, in particular, are these different topologies and options. And of course, the role of markets and the opportunity to use DER constructively to optimise investments within the network space. A little segue here just to introduce this notion of edge computing, because it's at the core of the way that we're responding to this problem. And edge computing, really, it's simply that we're looking not to try to manage distributed assets with a centralised cloud service, but to look intelligently as to how we can start to deploy some of this smart management and infrastructure down to the local level. Yeah? There are other buzzwords I could have brought here about fog computing, but I figured edge computing was a good enough buzzword to bring into the talk today. And this is what we do at SwitchDin in terms of managing and addressing this problem. We essentially, firstly, we have a small embedded controller. We call it our droplet, which basically provides a local aggregator at the local level. We virtualize all those different devices at the site in order to present a virtual DER. The virtual DER can then start to bring in standardisation. Yeah? Having that sort of capabilities at the local level mean that we can start to think about optimising based on the local conditions. So optimising to deliver value according to the business model that the platform's been deployed under, or optimising to deliver value by coordination and control. And then, of course, connecting this local level, again with the cloud, enables us to pass those, aggregate those values up to the next level. Let's call it whole of system, but certainly the next level. Droplets can also coordinate between each other, and I'll give you some examples about how that can work a bit later on. So what we're trying to do here is firstly to address complexity by providing an integration and aggregation solution at the local level so that the system sees a virtualised DER, and so that the platform from local level through to the control room, the whole of system operator, can start to address security and optimisation opportunities. And I guess this is the scale of the problem. At the moment, we have roughly 300 registered generators, and we're talking about a future where this is going to expand to 5 million odd DER within the network. So this is already the largest machine in the world, and we're talking about a hugely complicated shift in the capabilities of that system. So in terms of complexity, it's about building a system that accommodates all these heterogeneous parts. Yep. It's about providing local nodes which improve the ability to coordinate, given that there's a range of business models and a range of operating criteria in place. And of course, this also enables a better segregation of value to drive optimisation. So SwitchDin, so we create a uniform communication interface at each node. Each node can operate autonomously and coordinate with each other. And the key message here for us is that it's about driving standardisation at the right level so that we don't stifle innovation and we enable the market to do its thing. Having smarts at this level means that we can start to address supply security by managing these virtualised DER more effectively, and that brings to bear a whole range of efficiencies. And of course, in terms of cyber security, it means that we can manage from the node back to the control room, rather than relying upon public customer-owned internet and proprietary cloud platforms. So the object here is about building self-healing networks, autonomously orchestrating DER to control via secure communication channels. And here's an example. I'm running out of time. So here's one of our projects in Western Australia. This is an industrial microgrid. In this case, they've got three different vendor PV plants on site and 2 different battery solutions on site. That's the controller coordinates that as if it's one solar and one battery solution, as well as some small loads, in order to manage supply security. So in order to manage power flow to the load, but also to provide constant demand on the grid. So this is an edge of grid application where variation in demand from the grid is an issue for the network. Here's a remote microgrid, 700 houses. In this case, the deployment of DER, solar and batteries again, both resi and commercial, presented some major challenges in terms of balancing the operation of the microgrid. So deploying these smart nodes into these sites enabled the significant reduction in diesel consumption of the main power station. But the nodes operate autonomously and they share data. So even 2 weeks after this site was commissioned, the Telstra tower was struck by lightning, and we had 6 weeks of no comms to the site, but the site continued to operate throughout. Node-to-node coordination can present new value. So we stick a droplet in the distribution transformer, and we manage that microgroup dynamically to make sure that the operation at the distribution transformer stays within network constraints. So this is done dynamically in real time. It enables the houses to participate in any other opportunities or to optimise value at the site, but it still preserves the constraints of the network. So the optimisation challenge then can get divided into a number of different levels. So optimising at the node, so maximising energy efficiency. For the local network, by providing the sort of coordinated support that comes by having nodes communicate with each other, voltage management, optimising transformer operation. And then, of course, deriving new value in terms of operationalising microgrids in embedded networks, so managing export and import interactions with embedded networks. And then scaling that up through the cloud platform to create virtual power plants and network support through DERMS platforms. An example of this type of operation is currently being piloted in Western Australia, where we're looking at the node control, not just of solar and batteries, but also of loads, taking into account the local load on the embedded network at the distribution transformer. So again, managing that local cluster and then providing that scaling up to benefit the whole microgrid for Broome. So conclusion, DERs present significant opportunities, but there are immediate technical challenges with key and we see these as being around complexity. So we need to accommodate heterogeneous fleets. This is a market-led consumer DER explosion. We need to accommodate that. We can either do that by taking flexible approaches, such as what we're proposing here, or through mandating standards, but we risk stifling innovation. Security, both in terms of supply security, can benefit by having smarts at the edge, improving integration of loads and generation flexibly. But we need to be careful that we also get the right balance between the cybersecurity benefits of a utility-managed service down to the site versus multiple vendor clouds, proprietary and commercial-grade cloud solutions. And efficiency. Without proper coordination and consideration at different levels of the value chain, we risk losing the efficiencies that can come for all parties from the deployment of DER. Thank you.